Hello and welcome to Stories with Boo. Over the coming weeks I'm going to be telling you folk tales from around the world. Now folk tales are stories that come from the oral tradition. They are tales that have been told time and time again down through the generations year after year. And with each telling the stories changed a little bit. And storytellers, they're generous people. They believe that a story is a living thing, and to keep it alive is to keep telling it. Sometimes you will find these folk tales captured in a book, and when they're in that book, that's just like taking a snapshot of the life of that story. It would be a bit like taking a photo of you today and saying that that's how you were going to look for the rest of your life, which of course isn't true. The essence of you would still be there, but over the years you will change. And that's the same with story. So if you hear one of the stories that I'm going to tell you and you like it, then please take that story, go and tell it to a friend, go and tell it to a loved one or a family member. Because by telling that story, you're keeping the story alive. And by telling the story and keeping it alive, you are being part of the oral tradition. The story I'm going to tell you today comes from England. It comes from Norfolk. Once upon a time, and it wasn't this time, and it wasn't that time over there. It was a time long, long ago when most people in England lived in the countryside, when most people lived in small villages and tiny hamlets. So small were these hamlets that they had no shops, and so instead of the people going to the shops would come to the people. And the shops would come to the people via men and women called pedlars. Now John Chapman, the hero of our story, was one such pedlar. John Chapman was a pedlar. John Chapman was a one-stop shop on two legs. He sold pots and pans, he sold buttons and buckles, he sold lotions and potions, he sold ribbons for your hair, he sold brushes and brooms. In fact, folks said if you wanted something and John Chapman couldn't get it, it wasn't worth having in the first place. And John Chapman, he would walk and he would trudge up and down the length and the breadth of this land. He would walk the small lanes, the roads, the streets and the highways and the byways, selling his wares. And wherever he went, his little dog went with him too. Just like Boo is always with me. Oh, and that's my other dog, Polo. And when John Chapman had finished selling his wares, he would go back home. Now, I'm sad to say that John Chapman wasn't a rich man. In fact, he was quite poor. He lived in a tumble-down little cottage, and the birds would fly in at the windows and out through the roof. And growing outside his house was an old, twisty, gnarly hawthorn tree. The branches would grow in through the windows, and some were growing over the top and tap, tap, tapping on the broken roof. Now one night, when John Chapman was lying asleep in his little broken-down cottage, with the moon shining in through the break in the roof, he suddenly woke up with a start. He had heard a voice saying, "John Chapman, go to London Bridge. John Chapman, go to London Bridge." Oh, just a silly dream, he thought to himself, and he turned over and went back to sleep and didn't give it another thought. The following night, again, he woke up with a start. This time, the voice so clear inside his head, he was sure that there was someone in his cottage with him. He looked. But the cottage was completely empty, and again the voice said, "John Chapman, go to London Bridge. John Chapman, go to London Bridge." This kept John Chapman awake for a little while. It took him a while to be able to go back to sleep. And the following day, the dream played on his mind. The next night, again, when he went to sleep, again he was suddenly, bing, woken up by a voice as clear as moonlight in his head saying, "John Chapman, go to London Bridge. John Chapman, go to London Bridge." Well, John Chapman was now wide awake. 3 nights in a row he'd been having the same dream. What could it possibly mean? "There's nothing for it," he said. "I'm going to pack a bag and I'm going to see what there is to be seen at London Bridge." So pulling his pack onto his back and whistling for his dog, he set out of his cottage, out of the little village Swaffham where he lived, and started the 5-day trudge to London town. He walked down the little lane that opened out into a street, that opened out into a road, that opened out into the great old highway that led to old London town. And he walked and he walked and he walked some more. And when he got to old London town, he went to London Bridge. And nothing happened. Now at this time, London Bridge is different to how it is now. It was packed full of shops along both sides, and there were people coming and going backwards and forwards across the bridge. John Chapman stood there. He'd never seen so many people in one place before. He'd never seen people from every corner of the land before. And so he stood and he waited. And nothing happened. He waited until lunchtime. He waited until supper time. And still nothing happened. He had to find somewhere to go and sleep, and the following morning he got up and still nothing happened. He went and sat in the doorway of a shop and sat there. He was now starting to feel a little bit silly. How stupid of me to listen to that dream. After all, it was just a dream. And just as he was about to pull his pack back on his back and begin his trudge back home again to Swaffham, the shopkeeper came out of the door. "Hey friend," he said, "what are you doing here? You were here yesterday, weren't you?" Yes, said John. He was a little bit worried that he might get into trouble. Yes, I was here. "So tell me, what were you doing here? You didn't seem to be meeting anybody. You were just waiting all day yesterday and you're waiting here today. What are you doing, friend?" So John Chapman told the shopkeeper all about his dream and how 3 nights in a row he'd got woken up and had heard the voice telling him to go to London Bridge. Well, by now, the shopkeeper is roaring with laughter. "Oh, for goodness sake, what a fool you are, man, what a fool. It was just a dream. I mean, who would listen to a dream and then who would follow what the dream had told them to do? What nonsense. I mean, listen, I tell you what, I had a dream last night. This will make you laugh. I had a dream. There was this little tumble-down cottage in a village called Swaffham. That was it, Swaffham. And there was this little tumble-down cottage, and next to the cottage there was this old twisty hawthorn tree, and I was digging away, and as I was digging away underneath the hawthorn tree, there was this big pot, and I pulled the pot out, and it was full of gold coins. Well, by now, John Chapman has gone. He is just a dust of smoke, as he is running down the road, running across London Bridge, running out of good old London town. And he is running down the highway, he's running down the road, he's running down the street, and he's running down the lane. So quick is he, it only took him 4 days to get back to his cottage. And even though he was tired and he was dirty, he wasted no time at all. He picked up a spade and started digging. Dig, 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 dig underneath the roots of the hawthorn tree. And before long he heard dink, dink, dink. And he pulled out this big pot. And as he pulled the pot out of the earth, it cracked in two, and loads of gold coins all fell out onto the floor at his feet. Well, it's safe to say that John Chapman's peddling days were over. No longer did he need to walk and tramp the highways and the byways of this land. He now had enough money to live a comfortable life, to repair his windows, to fix the roof. And so you see, sometimes it's worth listening to your dreams, and sometimes it's worth following them too. And that is the end of that story.